You've done it before. Ended the relationship, swore this time it would be different. New person, same fight, different name, same dynamic. Maybe it's not relationships. Maybe it's the job. The boss who always turns out to be the same kind of person. The friendships that collapse at the same stage, in the same way. The city you moved to thinking something would change. It's not karma. It's not the universe. It's pattern recognition running on old data. And the mechanism is more precise than any spiritual explanation gives it credit for. You've done more than notice it. You've addressed it. You ended the relationship, left the job, moved to a different city, maybe started therapy, read the books, put in real time trying to understand why it keeps happening. And then, within months, quietly, the same dynamic reappeared. Different people, same argument, different company, same invisible ceiling, different city, same feeling of not quite belonging. Most people arrive at one of two conclusions when that happens. Either something is fundamentally wrong with them, a flaw wired in deep, something that follows wherever they go, or the world is simply like this. The environments are toxic, the people are unreliable, and the repetition is evidence of what's out there rather than what's inside. Both conclusions are wrong, and both of them miss what's actually happening. The sociologist Robert Merton put the mechanism precisely. A false definition of the situation evokes a new behavior, which makes the originally false conception come true. The belief was never accurate. It still produced the outcome it predicted, not through fate, but through the behavioral loop it initiated. If neither I'm broken nor the world is broken accounts for the regularity, and neither does, then something systematic is generating it. Something that doesn't care about your intentions, something that doesn't register effort the way you do. That something is the architecture of prediction. The brain doesn't record reality, it generates it. You're in a meeting. A colleague looks up from their notes and says, "Interesting take." Someone with a history of rejection hears dismissal, a polite version of, "That doesn't belong here." Someone with a history of being trusted hears curiosity, genuine engagement. The words were identical. What differed was the filter that completed them. The neuroscientist Carl Friston describes the brain not as a receiver of sensory information, but as a prediction machine, one that builds a model of what it expects to encounter and continuously tests it against incoming data. Your nervous system processes far more information than you consciously notice. Only a small fraction ever becomes explicit awareness. That selection is not random. It is driven by what the brain has already flagged as relevant, familiar, or threatening. Everything that perfectly confirms the prior model is suppressed before you ever know it existed. What reaches full awareness is the gap between what was expected and what arrived. Anil Seth, professor of cognitive and computational neuroscience at Sussex, calls conscious experience a controlled hallucination, a generative model constrained by, but not simply derived from, the senses. You are not perceiving the room you're in. You are generating a model of it, and sensory input is there to correct the edges. There is a softer version of this you've already experienced. The moment you buy a new car, you start seeing that model everywhere. The cars didn't multiply. Your brain simply unlocked them. The moment they became relevant, they entered the field of perception. Before that, they were invisible. Now scale that to people, to the type of person you notice first across a room, to the tone of voice that puts you on alert, to the first conclusion you draw when someone doesn't respond to your message for 4 hours. The filter was running long before that person appeared. The prediction doesn't just shape what you perceive, it shapes what happens. this is where it becomes harder to dismiss. Research published in Trends in Cognitive Sciences in 2019 by Daniel Yon and colleagues showed that when predictions are too strongly weighted, the brain doesn't simply distort perception. It drives action to conform the world to the model. The prediction initiates the causal chain that confirms it. Lisa Feldman Barrett at Northeastern University adds a further layer. In her work on constructed emotion, Barrett demonstrates that feelings are not triggered by external events. They are predictive simulations the brain runs in anticipation of events based on prior experience. The body enters the predicted emotional state before the situation confirms it. Have you ever felt dread before entering a room, before a single word was said? That wasn't a reaction. That was a prediction. You meet someone who seems genuinely interested. But you've felt this before, and it ended badly. Before they've done anything, the body is already in alert mode. You become slightly distant. They sense something is off and pull back. You read the pullback as confirmation. The schema ran the interaction from the inside, and the interaction produced exactly what the schema expected. The architecture behind the predictions, schemas, and why they resist updating. The psychiatrist Aaron Beck spent decades mapping what he called cognitive schemas, mental frameworks formed in early life that automatically filter all subsequent experience. Jeffrey Young later cataloged 18 of these early maladaptive patterns, each formed around unmet core needs in childhood, and each self-perpetuating through 3 mechanisms: attending to confirming data, blocking out threatening data, and overreacting in ways that provoke the expected response. The schema is not a belief you hold. It is the structure that holds your beliefs. It's the lens you look through without knowing you're wearing it. Someone sends you a message. Can we talk? If your schema is abandonment, you spend the next 4 hours preparing for a loss that hasn't happened. If your schema is entitlement, you assume it's a compliment. The ambiguous input was identical. The prior completed it. In 2006, neuroscientist Drew Westen at Emory University ran fMRI scans on partisan voters while showing them evidence that their preferred candidate had contradicted himself. When the contradictory information appeared, activity in areas associated with deliberate reasoning went quiet. The circuits responsible for emotional threat detection activated instead. Once the contradiction was resolved, emotionally neutralized, not rationally evaluated, the brain's reward system fired. Participants felt relief. They hadn't assessed the challenge. They had dismantled it. The feeling of, "I've figured this out," often means, "I've protected the model." This is why insight doesn't automatically produce change. You can recognize the pattern clearly. I do this with everyone. And 2 weeks later, nothing has shifted. Not because you're weak, because the schema that generated the behavior didn't update when you named it. Naming something and updating the structure that produces it are different neural events. Gonzalez-Picoche had a specific term for what this produces over time: the inquiste psicologico, the psychological encrusting. The habitual thought, repeated without examination, doesn't merely persist, it hardens. Layer by layer, confirmation by confirmation, until the distortion feels like clarity. The schema was not a mistake, it was intelligent. A child who grew up with an unpredictable parent learned, don't trust the good moments, they end, stay alert, attach minimally to stay protected. In that environment, that schema worked. It was a precision instrument built for a specific terrain. That same person at 35 cannot fully relax inside a stable relationship, not because they're broken, because the precision instrument is still running in a terrain that no longer requires it. The schema isn't damaged, it's deployed in the wrong context. This matters because the standard response to recognizing a destructive pattern is self-blame. And self-blame is itself a schema maintenance operation. It confirms the underlying belief that something is fundamentally wrong with you, which is exactly what the schema needs to keep running. The question is not, what is wrong with me? The question is, what was I trained to predict? And does that environment still exist? The pattern is not fate. It is architecture. Architecture can be examined. Examined architecture can be changed. Carl Jung wrote, "When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate." That's not mysticism. It's a precise description of what happens when the prediction runs unexamined. The unacknowledged expectation becomes the recurring event. The unspoken assumption generates the outcome you keep producing. Merton's formulation maps onto this exactly. The false belief, when it runs unexamined, initiates the behavioral loop that makes itself real. The loop is not self-correcting. It requires an interruption, which requires visibility. González-Pecoche observed that the dominant thought in a person's mind acquires energetic momentum and radiates outward continuously. It impregnates the environments they frequent most. Those environments begin to attract and return what the thought is already emitting. He was describing, without Friston's vocabulary, what active inference formalizes. The interior model emits. The social environment responds to what it receives. The prediction generates the confirming encounter. What happens externally deepens what was already internal. But here is what follows directly from the mechanism. The same process that generated the repetition is the process that, once made visible, can begin generating a different prediction. The filter is not fate. It is architecture. And architecture, unlike fate, can be redirected. Pecoche was precise about the threshold this requires. Whoever wishes to become what they are not must begin by ceasing to be what they are. Not a gradual revision, a discontinuity. The old model has to be seen. Clearly, without the urgency the schema itself generates to prevent exactly that, before the new one can take root. 3 instruments, not motivational practices. Instruments for working directly with the filter, each grounded in the specific mechanism described above. First, name what you're carrying, not what you intend. Before any charged interaction, pause and put into precise language the emotional state or prediction you're bringing into the room. Not, "I'm nervous." The exact word, "I'm expecting to be dismissed." "I'm waiting for the moment they prove they can't be trusted." "I'm already preparing for this to end." Matthew Lieberman at UCLA demonstrated using fMRI that labeling an emotional state in precise language. "I feel dismissed," not "I feel bad," significantly reduces amygdala activation and increases engagement in the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. Naming doesn't just produce awareness, it changes the neural signal. The schema doesn't disappear, but you are no longer entirely inside it. You are holding it at enough distance to see it. That distance is where choice begins. Second, make the schema an object you can look at. Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan has spent years researching what he calls self-distancing, reviewing your own behavior using your name and third-person perspective rather than first-person immersion. Instead of, "Why did I react that way?" you ask, "Why did react that way? What was predicting? What would have happened if that prediction had been wrong?" This is not a semantic trick. Kross's research, published in Advances in Experimental Social Psychology in 2017, shows that self-distancing reduces emotional flooding, improves the accuracy of self-analysis, and produces better predictions about future behavior. The mechanism is structural. Third-person framing moves the schema from subject position, the lens you look through, to object position, something with a history, a logic, and a context that preceded you. Once the pattern has a history, it is no longer the whole of reality. It is a pattern inside a larger one. Third, train the incompatible response, one thought at a time. Pecoche was precise about what he called the anti-deficiency. Not an affirmation, not a suppression. A specific counter-thought chosen with intention and repeated at the exact moment the habitual thought activates until it acquires enough momentum to begin opposing it. He described it as a police thought, one that watches, intercepts, and redirects. This maps directly onto what behavioral neuroscience calls response competition training. The old pathway is not destroyed. A new one is built through repetition at the moment of activation until it becomes the faster responding option. The instrument. Identify one specific prediction the schema runs. They will eventually leave. I will eventually be exposed. This will not last. Choose its structural opposite, not a positive reframe, a counter-prediction, and repeat it at the precise moment the schema activates. Not in the abstract, at the moment. 2 weeks of consistent substitution begins to widen the gap between impulse and response. That gap is not a minor thing. That gap is where the change takes root. The scenario from the opening, new person, same fight, is not a mystery. The record was already in the groove before they walked in the door. Pecoche described ordinary people as phonograph owners who always play the same record, not because the record is good, but because they lack the resources to acquire others. The needle keeps scratching its groove, over and over, not because it must, because no one has remembered to change it. The science uses different language. The brain runs predictions from prior models. Schemas seal themselves. The loop continues until something interrupts it, and the mechanism does not care about your intentions. It responds to familiarity. You are not what has happened to you. You are the filter through which you've been reading it. Change the filters, and start changing your fate. Think about the situation in your life that keeps repeating, not as a verdict, as a question. What prediction are you walking into it with? What does the filter expect to find? And which of the 3 instruments do you think would be hardest for you to actually use? And why? Tell me in the comments. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time is valuable, and I genuinely hope this was worth it. If this video left you with something, a thought, a shift, a question you didn't have before, a like helps it reach someone else who might need it too. That's all I ask. And if you want to keep going, subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next one.